Hi, welcome back to Careers in Discovery. This week I'm joined by David Gray, Chief Scientific Officer at Vigil Neuroscience. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
I suppose a great place to start would be to talk about the work that Vigil Neuroscience are doing at the moment.
Yes, thanks. It's a very exciting and interesting time for us. Vigil is a clinical stage microglia focused biotech company. Microglia are the main component of the brain's unique immune system, and we've seen the power of harnessing the immune system in oncology in terms of making vast progress against a number of cancers, as well as in other indications. And so our focus is on selectively and productively harnessing the immune system, and specifically the microglia, to treat both rare and common neurodegenerative diseases. We are advancing two clinical programs. One of them is well into phase 2, which is for a disease known as ALSP, which is a rare adult onset leukodystrophy. We're proud to be the first company to study this disease and to do an interventional study. And so we will have a readout from that phase 2 in the first half of next year. And so looking forward to that. And then our other clinical program is in phase 1 for Alzheimer's disease. Both programs are focused on TREM2, which is a microglia target, but one of them is a monoclonal antibody and the other one is an agonist. So a little unique in that we have both modalities, and we also have preclinical efforts focused on, again, microglia and other ways to productively modulate them.
Very interesting and exciting times.
Yeah.
So how did you choose a scientific career, particularly in drug discovery?
Well, definitely that was not intentional from a young age. I was interested in a lot of things, but primarily writing. And I really wanted to be an author. And I had written as a youth a number of stories. And back then you used to put them on paper and submit them to publishing houses. And then you would get these letters back saying that, they didn't want to publish your work. But that was very much my focus. And so when I started college, I was a creative writing major. And one of the classes that I took was called Writing About Science. And as part of it, we had to interview a professor about his or her work, and then write about it in a more layman's terms, like these sort of 1 or 2 page articles you see at the back of Time magazine or something about a scientific concept. And I tried to interview this professor. He was too busy. I could never connect with him, but his postdoc was there. And I think because he was there and connected with him, he really explained what this lab was doing in great detail. And it was just fascinating. It was super interesting. And he was a great teacher, really engaging. And as I interviewed him a couple times for the article, and then I had this very distinct thought, why would I write about this when it sounds like I could do this? Like this sounds like something I want to actually do as opposed to write about. And that was kind of the Go ahead.
Yeah, especially if you can translate all that scientific knowledge into, like you said, layman's terms without the scientific expertise, right? That's quite a skill.
Well, I don't know that I necessarily had it, but he had it. This postdoc had it, and it was just, it was fascinating, and it sounded like it was going to change the world. They were working on DNA manipulation, and it was super interesting. So one thing led to another. I started taking classes. I got into a lab. I started doing, and as soon as I did my first experiment, I was completely hooked. This was an organic chemistry lab, and we were working on mechanisms of cocaine addiction. It was just like super interesting, growing these cocaine plants, trying to extract stuff from them. I didn't do that part, but people in the lab were doing it, and just it all was interesting. We were like doing some computational work and even writing some grants. And so once I had that, I was just hooked and kind of all in from then on.
And then talk to me about your career and the steps that have been perhaps most formative for you
I can't say that I was
from
super
the lab?
intentional about where I wanted to end up. In fact,
Okay.
when I went to do my PhD at Scripps for organic chemistry, I knew I loved making compounds, getting into the lab and kind of
Mm,
physically manipulating things and trying the challenge of trying to come up with a way to make something. But I had no thought of how that would lead to a job. My
okay.
my father is a
Yeah.
professor, and maybe that seemed like a kind of career path. But the idea of making drugs or being in pharma or anything had literally never crossed my mind. I had really no idea that chemists even were involved in that. But once I got into my PhD, a lot of the older students, as they would graduate, they were going on to get jobs at big pharma companies. And I started to get exposed. Also, Scripps is a place where they're doing a ton of kind of cutting edge biology. And so
Yeah.
started to get exposed to the applications of, not just chemistry, but all of the different kinds of biological techniques that were being explored at Scripps. And then from then I thought, oh yeah, I want to do that. I want to try to make drugs.
How did you take that first step? Was it a particular person? Was it the right job opportunity at the right time
Do you mean after education?
after your PhD? Yeah.
Well, the job market was really good back then, or fairly good. So it was pretty easy to get a job as an organic chemist, as a med chemist. At least it felt pretty easy. There were a lot of companies that actually came and interviewed us. We didn't even have to go anywhere. You would
Yeah.
just sign up for a slot and they would interview you. Then they'd fly you out. It was all very exciting. So I ended up with a number of different opportunities, and I picked the one that fit my personality the best. And I think in
Yeah.
particular, the people
Yeah.
who they're, I was surprised at how different the people were at some of the different companies. And so, yeah, I started working with Pfizer in Ann Arbor, Michigan,
Yeah.
and was closer to. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Minnesota, so there was a pretty strong pull to try to be closer to there, and there weren't a lot of options in the Midwest, but that was one of them. And yeah, so I started out in the MedChem group there, and probably one of the underappreciated, most important things was that I had the opportunity to pick my supervisor because I had a lot of openings, and I was the first person to
Okay.
and there was a woman there who I could just tell she was invested in me personally,
Yeah.
as opposed to kind of what could I do for him or her. It was a little bit also what could she do for me
Yeah.
uh, as we interviewed. So I picked her, and she turned out to be an incredible supervisor.
And you had a long career with Pfizer, nearly 15 years?
Yes, just 16 years, I think. Yeah.
16 years. Wow. And the opportunities and the moves that you made throughout your time at Pfizer, how did you plan more of that career journey?
No, it's more of the same story, I'm afraid. If there's any kind of lessons in career planning, then probably in the formal sense, I'm not a good example to look at. But I think there are some really important learnings that I would always share with anyone who's sort of thinking about career development. So
Yeah.
what ended up happening was I joined a MedChem group, and right away, I realized, and this was a surprise to me, that I was interested in the whole picture, not just
Mm,
how to make the compounds and how to put them, get them into a bottle, fill them up, what do they do, but everything about the whole drug discovery process. I was interested in the clinical piece, the safety piece. I was interested in the PK and all of it. And there were just all these people around who were more than happy to take some time to talk to me about what they did.
yeah.
And to some extent, if you went and knocked on their door and said, "Hey, can you explain PK to me? I don't really get it." If you were curious in that way, then you would open this floodgate of information from someone who's 20, 30 years in the industry and knows everything about
Yeah.
it. And so I just just did that over and over and over again, and in fact, I'll take it a step further. I don't know how easy this would be to do nowadays, but I would go into the lab, into the biology lab, and run assays. They would, I would want, I want to know how this assay works. Can you teach me how to run it? And then I would go like every Tuesday and we'd run one of the screens, or I started dosing animals. Again, I think this is a little harder to do nowadays because of the trainings that are required. But, so, and that was, some of that stuff was super informative to me because, you'd pick up one and it would just be like laying there in your arms, all chill, and you would dose it. Then the next one is super feisty. And we're going to measure the brain chemistry of two animals that are clearly not having the same experience at the time when they're being, when they're being manipulated. So all of those things, just sort of learning that. I did a little bit of stuff in the scale-up lab, kind of like a sponge, right? I mean, that was my approach to career development, is just to learn everything I could about everything. It was fascinating. It was fun. There was a lot of opportunity at a big place like Pfizer. And what ended up happening was that breadth of understanding, like genuine understanding, unlocked some doors. And I started to use that were probably not typical for a classic med chemist, because I had all these other, connectivities.
All those strings to your bow.
Yeah.
And then you made it to senior director at Pfizer before moving into the biotech world. What was important from a competency perspective to make that shift?
Into biotech?
Yeah. Coming from Pfizer, such a big machine.
Well, a couple things. One very important thing that I guess I didn't mention is that this was critical. At some point in continuing to do what I just talked about, I made the transition from the chemistry group into the biology group.
Yeah.
And that is down to one individual in particular who was leading that function, who had worked with me and recognized that I had some things to offer there, and basically took a flyer on me to some extent. Like, you have to, and I believe in that very strongly too. You see talent, you recognize it, and one of the ways to develop it is to take a risk on these people, on somebody, and give them an opportunity to show what they can do. So that move into biology, pretty unusual even at Pfizer, to go into that. And then, that kind of continued actually. And so when I the senior director at that role, that was within the biology function, leading a lot of biology at Pfizer, as well as being very heavily involved in a lot of the clinical programs. I was leading, several of the later stage clinical programs. And so that whole, again, very broad expertise was probably the answer to your question in terms of being very well prepared to go into biotech. Now, I don't think you need to do all those things, because there's these are very, very different environments, but it certainly prepared me very, very well to have an impact right away once I made that move.
Yeah. Were there any unexpected lessons that you learned upon joining the biotech world?
Well, no, I would say no.
Good.
And that is, down to the fact that after 15 years, 16 years at Pfizer, you become, if you have your eyes open, you begin to appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of that model.
Yeah.
It has tremendous resource, a very long-term focus, very quality focus, and a tremendous amount of talent. It's also, everyone knows this, slow, bureaucratic, sometimes hard to take a lot of risks and go outside the box. And that is what biotech is good at. And I had been involved in a lot of the due diligence and in-licensing activities during my time at Pfizer, so I saw how we made up for those shortcomings in our model by accessing this external ecosystem where risks were being taken and things were moving very quickly. And then we would access them with these different deals. So I was expecting that to be the case, and it is the case.
Yeah, very well prepared. So we touched a little bit on people that have been influential throughout your career. From a mentorship perspective, how has that worked for you?
Well, I say this all the time. Probably people who know me have heard me say this, but you can work on all the greatest programs ever, and you can do everything in your power to give them the best chance to succeed. But you can't necessarily guarantee that you cannot guarantee that any individual program is going to have any impact on human health or on people's lives. But you absolutely can guarantee that you can impact the people you work with. And that you have complete control over. And starting from my very first boss, she cared about people. She cared about science. She was a good scientist. She, cared about the projects and the deliverables and all the usual things, but she cared about me. How was I doing as a person? Was I, thriving or struggling? And without being prying or nosy, I knew that if I was having a hard time, she would probably notice, if something was hard. And that resonates with me anyway. My mom was like that too. My mom was an amazing person who had a huge influence on my life and was just really good at seeing other people where they were at. So that has been, I think that was kind of the first big influence, is that you can do really good science and you can do really important things without being a jerk, without stomping on people and putting them down, without and also seeing people and actually building them up, not treating them as cogs in a wheel. So that was the first kind of very formative thing that I saw, and it wasn't the only one that I saw. It was a good group there, and she was that. And then I mentioned again this boss I had who just took a risk on me, and I know you're a chemist, but I'm over here on the biology line and we could really use your talents. And I don't care if you don't have a PhD in biology. That gave me a lot of confidence. I don't think I've really ever struggled with confidence, but having someone believe in you that much to give you an important role that they were counting on, and basically just saying, like, we'll figure it out together. I'll help you. That was a really big moment, and not just for me and my career, but also realizing that that's a power that I have that I can do for other people too.
I was going to ask, once you've become a chief scientific officer, you not only have the ability to influence the people in your team, but the whole business. How do you enable that strength of yours to resonate throughout the business?
Well, I've always been good at influencing how things happen. And to me, I'm not quite sure why that is true. I think it's, you think about like what is maybe unique about you, or what are some of your talents. One of the things that I'm good at. Yeah. And where does that come from? I'm not really sure. Is it easy to develop? I'm not really sure. But I do know that I've always been good at recognizing talent in other people, like talent, and then and good ideas and things, and sort of glomming onto those. So you don't have to always be the one to come up with everything or to drive everything. If you can recognize the talent in someone else or the idea in someone else, and then champion it. So I think that's something I've generally been good at. And then finding a way to influence a situation, kind of seeing for what it is. To me, it's just common sense. I feel like everything I do is mostly just common sense, but it doesn't seem like it's common sense to a lot of other people. So I don't really know.
Common sense isn't so common anymore, though, is it?
No, but like here, we have this problem. Maybe like just as an example, at one point at Pfizer, we were working on a program And I really felt scientifically it needed to be a Parkinson's program.
Okay.
It wasn't originally what it was started for. And Parkinson's was quote unquote off strategy for Pfizer at the time, meaning that we weren't allowed to work on Parkinson's projects because commercially they weren't interested in Parkinson's.
Yeah.
And I just looked at that as a problem of influence. Like, who makes these decisions? What data do they have? What data would they need to change their mind? And I went on about a 6-month campaign, made friends with the right people, brought them the right information. And then the next thing you knew, it was on strategy and we could
Brilliant.
work on it. So to me, that's not anything that anyone else couldn't have done, but it was common sense. And a lot of people thought, well, how did you do that? How did you take this big organization and convince them to change their mind? And ultimately is in their best interest. Like that program is going to become, or has the potential to become an important medicine in Parkinson's. So
Yeah.
I just thought I was doing what just made sense.
I think that probably starts with confidence. A lot of people perhaps wouldn't have the confidence to think that their opinion was better than perhaps the opinions that had been before them, but you saw an opportunity.
That is a good point. And I react negatively, I think, like most people do, to unfounded arrogance, and that's
Mm,
not something that I would ever want either. And so I think there is a danger when you're confident to either push things that are not founded, or to be arrogant, or to
mm,
be not consideration or considering other people's opinions. But influence and communication are
yeah,
critical in this industry. You have to be able to tell your story in a way that makes sense, and that's part of that is data, and part of that is
yeah,
not data. Part of that is sort of soft skills.
yeah. Dealing with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's a fascinating story. So, if you were to give a piece of advice to scientists that are early in their career, what would that one piece of advice be?
You probably heard this before. I would say have fun. Um,
I
and
haven't.
and here's the reason why. We have an incredible privilege to have a job where what we're doing is important by all objective
Yeah,
measures. We are well compensated and we're able to support ourselves with this career. And we have the ability to use our brains and be creative. And, these are all just, not every job is like that. And so
no.
you have this tremendous sort of starting point on which to
Mm,
work. But if you don't have fun with it, if you don't, then it can become a very long slog, or kind of because there's so much failure. Ultimately, if you're working in life sciences, you're going to deal with way more failure than success, way more
yeah.
setbacks than true failures. And so you have to. The way
Mm,
you get through that, I think, is that the day-to-day work needs to be enjoyable, and a
yeah,
lot of that is, again, the people. Being connected to the people that you're working with is really important. And if you're having fun, then I feel like a lot of the other things flow from that. So, for
yeah,
example, in my case, I loved chemistry and I like making compounds, but I liked the application more. And the way
yeah,
I found that out was by realizing that when I was in the lab running some of the biology experiments, I was having potentially more fun than I was having when I was running the chemistry experiments. And when I
yeah,
was thinking about some of these big picture things, I was having a lot of fun with that. So in chasing the fun, or in chasing your passions, I think sometimes people
yeah,
talk about, the day-to-day implementation of that is appreciating where you're at and having fun with it.
yeah. Very satisfying. Yeah. So what's next? We've talked about being clinical trials. What are the next steps for Vigil Neuroscience and for you, David?
Well, I mean, you talk about what is our ambition is to bring a next generation Alzheimer's treatment into being. That
Mm.
no small feat. That would be an incredible accomplishment for all of us, and something that probably never come down from that high to some extent, given the people that suffer from that disease and how much unmet need there is still there. So that
Yeah.
at a broad level on the Alzheimer's side, and then similarly ALSP, we're very involved with the patient community there. Again, we're
Yeah.
the company that's doing any kind of therapeutic intervention in that.
Mm,
And so there's sort of two things of what's next. One part of it is building awareness around the disease and a community and continuing to be good citizens and valued citizens with the rest of that community, that have them know that we're genuinely working for them and with them. And then part of it is execution. So we are now in phase 2, and we need to do all the things that we need to. We have some great rare disease experience at Vigil, and so we need to do everything we can do to bring this to patients as fast as we can. So those are our two main focuses.
no mean feat.
Well, I am, to use my own words, I'm having a ton of fun, and I have pretty much for most of my career. But one of the good things about that is it doesn't lead me to where I'm sort of saying, well, I'll be happy when I get to this next level, or I'll be happy when I get to this next thing. I'm happy now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm having fun now. And so that also makes it easy to think about the future, because what I have the opportunity to do here is to have a very outsized influence on everything I just talked about in terms of what we're
Yeah.
trying to do at Vigil. And I see that as being completely replicable and scalable as many times as
Yeah.
I want to, for as long as I want to do this.
Yeah. I bet it's great to be a member of your team.
Well,
I can
I hope
imagine.
so. I couldn't. I hope it is. And it doesn't mean fun and easy aren't necessarily always the same thing.
No.
If you climb a mountain, it's mostly fun when you're at the top, but you need to also stop and look at the vistas along the way as well.
Yeah. And look at where you've come from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I never would have predicted that too. I mean, there was never a time in, when I was in school or even when I started out in
Yeah.
chemistry, that I ever thought I would have the kind of impact and influence that I've been able to have. There's again, I mentioned the Parkinson's medication, which hopefully will become a medicine in the next few years. I can proudly say that would not exist without my efforts.
Yeah.
And that's a great feeling.
Yeah. And tell me, boy that used to want to be an author, does he still write?
I really, I really still want to be an author. That
Yeah.
is a statement, and I am sure that before my entire story is written, there will be at least one thing. Now you can self-publish, so it doesn't matter if it's
Yes.
any, but
Yeah.
there will be at least one. I have an idea that I really like that I've been kind of working on, and what I would
Oh,
really
well,
like is to write it with my kids. I have some really talented kids that also like to write, and I think it would be really cool to have a book that we work on together.
that would be really special. Yeah, really special. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Careers and Discovery. Good luck with everything that Vigil are going to achieve and
Thank
with the book.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the invite, and look forward to. I did listen to a few of these recently. Looking forward to continuing to stay in touch with this podcast.